Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 16, Devil in a Blue Dress by Walter Mosley. Welcome back to Point Blank. My name is Kurt, and joining me is Justin. How's it going, Justin?
Hi, Kurt. I'm pretty good today. Hello, audience out there. It's a kind of day that makes me feel like I'm happy to be inside, and it's a Friday, which means I went to my favorite Vietnamese restaurant for lunch and sort of went over this book again, Devil in a Blue Dress, just to remind myself of some of the key features. So it was a pretty good day. How about you?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. It's good reading weather here in Seattle, so fall, winter has set in, and it's gross and, overcast out, so wonderful northwest weather.
Fair enough. We have sort of that northwest weather down here, I think. It's not quite raining, but there was some flecks of snow as I was walking to the restaurant, and the clouds were heavy over the mountains, and there's some snow on the hills, so perhaps not quite Pacific, but a little damper and drearier than I'm used to. But it helped to set the tone. As a matter of fact, it isn't like this Mosley book is a dreary noir, but talking about these books, it's nice to have a cozy environs to base ourselves with. On my way home from the restaurant, I stopped at a liquor store because I wanted to have a nice rye. I like to have a sipping rye when I do the podcast. So I picked up a bottle and was standing in line, and I was holding this book, the Mosley book, in my hand, and I look ahead of me, and there's this guy that I swear to God, he looks just like Walter Mosley on the cover of the book. He has the same hat, he has the same facial features, and he was looking at me, and then he looked away, and I started to trip out a little. I was like, is he in Albuquerque? And I actually went home and searched. I'm like, is he on a book tour? Turns out he is not. It was just my mind playing tricks on me. But that got me all psyched to do the podcast.
Well, that's great. As again, here we are for only the second time. We have an author who is still alive and still writing. So
yes,
it's quite possible that you may have seen him there picking up a bottle of something.
Mm-hmm.
That does bring us into today's book, which is Devil in a Blue Dress. And this is the first of the E.Z. Rawlins mysteries. And just a general impression, I enjoyed this one just because it felt like a palate cleanser after our last couple of books. I'll get into exactly, what I thought about it later, but, just an easy, enjoyable mystery to read, I thought, with that still poked at some interesting, some elements of society and had some interesting things to say. But what did you think about it, Justin?
Well, I totally agree with you. As a palate cleanser after the two heavy, thick tomes that we read, one of them we really enjoyed, one of them we did not. It was nice to read this was an under 200-page book, and it flew, especially early on, it flew at the right pace, and it just kept me riveted. I have a lot of good to say about this book, and, there are some problems too, but overall, I remain fairly optimistic about the series, and I'm excited to see where E.Z. Rawlins goes after this first one.
Yeah.
Do you want me to give a brief summary of the book for our listeners?
Sure, that'd be great. I just wanted to say that the Rawlins mysteries, I do think the one thing about this is it's the beginning of the series. And I looked at the overall reviews. There's 14 books in the series. And this one, the first one, has the most critical reviews to it. And I thought that was interesting, but we're also building on characters here. And I did have to keep that in mind because we're talking about what has become a beloved character over a 14-book arc and not just from this one novel.
That's good to know, and that's sort of what I was hoping would happen with the series, because I know that, Mosley, he's won plenty of awards. I can't even remember the list of all the things that he's accomplished in his time as a literary figure, but yeah, this book definitely felt like a first novel, but not in a way that made me turn off of it. It kept me curious about what's to come, and it's nice to read a first novel that I don't know a lot about. I didn't know much about the author, only that he was acclaimed. and it was fun to see the origin story and then where we go from here. I know that Red Death is the second book in the series, and it's one I'm really excited to check out. So, but why don't I give my brief summary here, just so the readers are clued in as to what this book's about and our general feelings on it. So, Walter Mosley's Devil in a Blue Dress is the first novel in the Easy Rawlins series. It is set in post-war Los Angeles, the Watts area specifically, and the focus of the novel is on criminal activities in working-class black communities. Mosley, who is a black man who grew up in Los Angeles, offers a voice that, until the Rawlins series, was very rare in crime fiction, that of a black man struggling to get by in a world where white people hold the power. Mosley's Easy Rawlins is a love child of Chester Himes and Philip Marlowe, and Devil in a Blue Dress is an origin story of Easy Rawlins as a private investigator. Now, the plot is basic, and this is good, but it's also, as things get more complicated over the course of the story, it leads to some problems as well. To start off, Easy Rawlins loses his job at the factory. And on page 1, he is in a black-owned bar above the meatpacking plant, drowning his sorrows when the bartender, his friend, who goes by the name of, I think, Joppy, introduces Easy to a well-dressed white man who offers him a job. The job is simple: find a woman who has gone missing. Easy hems and haws, but ultimately decides to take the gig because he doesn't want to miss a house payment. He is a homeowner in Los Angeles. He's not from Los Angeles. He came from Houston. He was a war vet, and now he's sort of made it. He has a house and he has that settlement. And in pre-Civil Rights Act 1940s, this is an accomplishment. It's a symbol, and it's one that he wants to hold on to. So this idea of getting a little money for a little bit of searching and rescuing this particular woman, it's a sort of a thing that he's attracted to. It's an easy way to secure his house payments and keep his life stable. What Mosley does really well here is he speaks to race and racial relations, and I found this sort of commentary throughout the novel really effective and necessary. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. We have Easy Rawlins, who's an honest and interesting character. I thought that, at least. And the social commentary on race in post-World War II Los Angeles was well rendered. We watch Easy transform over the course of the novel from a guy who sort of reluctant. He's like the reluctant hero. He just wants to live his life and stay out of the criminal stuff and the weirdness. But over the course of the first 100 pages, all of a sudden he's searching for this woman, and he ends up experiencing or being close to several murders. Cops are breathing down his neck, incredibly racist cops, I'll have you know. And he gets brought into the office to the police station more than once, and all of a sudden he's in the thick of it. And the question is, will Easy make it out, and will he make it out on his own terms? I said before, and I'll say it again, the ending and the plot in general is clumsy, and it gets worse, I think, as the novel proceeds. I wish that Mosley had slowed down in the last 30 pages especially and let the novel breathe like a wine. But this is his first novel, so here's to hoping that Mosley keeps what works in Devil, which is a lot, and then adds to it, including a little bit of a clearer head about how plot works, the connections and the linkages that make plot effective. So overall, I gave this 4 hits because I enjoyed it, and I enjoy the promise of it, and I look forward to more. So I have a longer review for the next time around, but that's my brief summary for now. How does that sit with you, Kurt?
That sits pretty well. I agree with a lot of what you said in your preview. I think his commentary on place and race is especially clear and vivid in this book. And I would also agree that from a stylistic point of view, the plot is a little clumsy. I think he's really good with his characters. I think he brings very colorful characters to the page. I think he gives us good dialogue in this book. But yeah, the plotting of it does kind of fall apart in that last little bit. Not completely falling apart, but it feels, as you said, it feels a little rushed or something along those lines. I hesitated with my review on this because when I first finished it, I was like, man, that's a solid 4. And then when I sat on it for a week or so, I was kind of saying, well, no, I think it's more a 3.5. But then I recently, to prepare for the show, I was watching some interviews with with Mosley on YouTube and whatnot. And some of the things he had to say about the character sort of elevated, brought some of the highlights of this book back into my mind. So I'm going to stick with a reluctant 4 out of 5. Now, again, kind of like some of the other books that I've given a review like that too. I think this is still something I would strongly recommend, and I think our listeners would really enjoy reading it if they haven't already. And I have to say that he as a writer is somebody, he's probably the only writer that we've addressed that I've known about for years and never read. And I knew about him through his science fiction work.
Interesting.
Which we can talk about later. Yeah. And, I kind of in a back burner to read sometime in the future kind of author. And I knew he wrote these E.Z. Rollins mysteries, but that wasn't what originally brought his name to my attention. And that's interesting that he has this sort of dual fan base, because he does write across genres and cover a lot of different space. Yeah, I would strongly recommend this one. I think our listeners would enjoy it. And I think that his writing has some very powerful things to say about society, about American society, both in the historic time of this novel, but also in our condition or the state of things today.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, I felt like I'm reading a contemporary novel. The stuff that's touched on in what is essentially set in the late 40s, 1948, I believe. Post World War II, things are booming, things are looking up, but there's this undercurrent, and the race stuff is clearly still very obviously in the forefront as a problem. But we don't really see that in so much crime fiction, because we don't have the point of view of a black person experiencing things firsthand. And that's what this does very well. And it shows how much of what this book features is still relevant to modern or current events from Black Lives Matter on. So I feel like it feels very fresh in a way, even though it was written in probably 1990 or the early 90s. It feels like perfectly current, in modern times.
Yeah, and we can get into that in a lot more depth in part 2. I would really strongly recommend this one to our listeners. Give it a read, and don't just read it as the novel stands alone. Think about some of the things that both Mosley and E.Z. Rollins have to say about society in the novel.
Totally, I agree with that.
All right, so we have a couple of featured reviews for you today, and I believe Justin has done a little bit of a summary.
That is accurate. Typically, our featured reviews are items we've received from fans or interested parties who want to get exposure, and so we agree to read or view their work. And if we really like something, if we love something, we'll give it a full 5-minute featured review. And if we don't like it at all, we don't do anything with it. But if there's something that's sort of in the middle where we feel like it has a little bit of merit, but overall it doesn't work out, we decided that we're going to feature it as well, at least in a partial feature. So we're going to call this a 2-for-1 deal today. We have 2 items that we received and reviewed, and one of them is the name of the author is Matt Fitzpatrick, and the name of the novel is Crosshairs, and both of us read it. Here's my brief commentary on it. I didn't love it, and I wanted to, but I didn't, and that's the setup for this. It was put out by Green Place Books out of Vermont, and I was excited when I received it. It has a cool cover, and it's set in Boston, and the author called it Boston Grit, which, has a nice ring to it. It makes me think about Dennis Lehane's Mystic River and his other work, and all that gritty Bostonian, those elements that make Boston a great place for crime fiction. And of course, those are, if you're trying to compare a book to Dennis Lehane, you're setting the book up for potential failure, and maybe that was my problem. But as it turns out, having read this novel, it definitely felt like a first novel, but not in the same way that it did for the Mosley book. In this way, it felt like it was a novel that wasn't quite ready to be released. Personally, that's how I felt. We get 3 main characters. We get a guy named Justin McGee. Note the last name. We just had Travis, or we spent a whole episode talking about Travis McGee. So definitely, I think that the author, Matt Fitzpatrick, was influenced by MacDonald's work. So we get Justin McGee and 2 other people. Let me quote the blurb for you. Justin McGee is a high-powered attorney who moonlights as the city's most successful and highly paid assassin. Darby McBride is an aging mobster looking for a new life, and Captain Caleb Frost is a hardscrabble fisherman who comes to the crossroads between his own ethics and the lure of a lucrative New England heroin trade. Okay, interesting. I like the premise for these characters. I figured they'd get tangled up in new and exciting and dangerous ways that captivated me. Now, unfortunately, there was a lot of window dressing about these characters in their past. There's tons of backstory. We dive into all these characters and their entanglements with secondary and tertiary characters. Characters get ladled into the story like a New England clam chowder. Yet every time we get a new character, I go, okay, but where are we going? And every time a new character enters and leaves and we get another one after that, I have that same question. And all the way through the book, it was like that. And that's the big issue I have with this book. I feel like Matt Fitzpatrick can write character and can write description, but we don't have a coherent plot. There are whispers of a plot. There are themes. There's internal struggle. But what actually happens and why it happens and whether it happens for the writer or for the reader, suffice it to say, didn't happen for me. So I call this book a miss or a near miss. I think that Matt Fitzpatrick clearly loves the genre. He's interested in crime fiction, and I think he can really find a place in Boston crime fiction if he could figure out how to turn what is a nicely rendered detail and character descriptions, really, and turn it into something that has more cohesive motor, a plot that takes us somewhere, things that come together to a conclusion that feels earned. So let's call it a lesson for starting writers. It's good to write what you know, but don't feel that you have to put everything that has ever happened to you in your first book. Take some threads from your life and explode them, give them flesh, deepen them, and give us a character or two that we want to spend time with. Make them fallible, folks who strive and struggle. Don't make them the best thing ever at what they do. Make them somebody who's striving. And give us a plot that makes us want to know what happens next. So that's my opinion of this book. I think it's a good shot. I think it's a good start. I just don't think it was ready to be published at this point. How do you feel, Kurt, about my thoughts on this? I don't mean to be harsh. I just want to be honest.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it as well. I think there's a lot of interesting elements in this book, and I also think it's a near miss. I think if this had been presented to me, say, as a beta reader or something like that, I would have said, hey, you've got some really good stuff here, and but there's a lot of things that need some addressing. It feels like an unfinished manuscript, and I think the author strove to mimic some elements of authors. Like I was struck. I saw elements of Tim Dorsey in here in the Serge Storm novels, which I just happened to read one of those recently.
Okay.
And because of that wackiness and also the sort of like playing with the timeline sort of elements. Mm-hmm. And I think he tried to throw a little bit too much at a first novel, and that's what really sticking with a more standard plot line would have helped, or if he was going to go for a more elaborate structure, some more editing would have been good. But like you said, there's interesting characters here. There's interesting description, and I enjoyed those elements. I was always waiting for something else to happen or for it to kind of clean itself up somewhere in the plot, and that just didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I would like to see his writing again, but I would really suggest that it get more attention before it goes to print next time.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, I've been struggling with these questions myself. I'm working on a novel in progress, and when you're trying to do something, you have to struggle between finding that balance of writing a straight story, a straight cohesive story that people will receive well, and writing something that matches your level of ambition. And sometimes ambition pushes you into unfamiliar or dangerous waters, and some of that, like the idea of multiple points of view and fragments in the story, and really messing with narrative to try to do something avant-garde or postmodern. I get the appeal of that, and I'm tempted into those arenas myself. But at the end of the day, especially when you're starting off, to be able to write a straight story, it's it's wiser to figure out how to do that and do it, execute it well once, so that you can then break all the rules and do your Faulkner stuff. I think that's sort of what happened here. I think writing this in a more straighter fashion would have elevated it. So I guess we're in the same boat here, and it's a boat that isn't quite sinking, but it's taking on a little bit of water, and it would be best for, in short, close, but not quite. So we have one more. We have a movie, actually, and this is the first movie we've received, and both Kurt and I viewed it. It's called Trouble Is My Business. So longtime crime readers will be familiar with the line. It comes from Chandler, and it was created by Tom Conkle. Trouble Is My Business is a love letter to the classic 1940s era film noir. The film is written, directed, and stars Tom Conkle along with Brittany Powell, and it was funded in part through a Kickstarter campaign I learned after the fact. The story goes like this. It's 1947 Los Angeles, and gumshoe Roland Drake is down on his luck until he meets Catherine Montemar. Their doomed romance leads to corruption, murder, and betrayal. I enjoyed aspects of this film, but as you can see from my very brief summary, it has sort of fits all the, or checks all the boxes of noir cliches, which, while refreshing and charming in a certain sense, also made me beg the question, what's new and exciting about this? The pastiche I love. It's cool. It's clear that Conkle is a student of film noir. He gets the set pieces down. There's some really cool stuff he does, and I can't tell if it's a true set or some weird computer animated graphics or what. But some things, it definitely feels like what noir sometimes feels like in our heads, with the rain and Chandler's Los Angeles at its rainiest with a little bit of Hammett thrown in. He gets these pieces down, and the atmosphere is nice. But on a whole, I found the whole thing to be impassioned pastiche, and it doesn't quite hit all the marks. And this is fine, and as a fan film or as a love letter to the genre, as Kurt often says, I think it's okay. But when I watch a film personally, I want to be transported to something new and something I haven't thought about. And this film felt like it was recycling too much of what makes film noir great without saying anything new. So I consider it a miss or a near miss, but I think for those of you who are fans of film noir and a lot of the tropes of film noir, it's a fun study, and it's worth checking out on that level. It's available on a few of the pay for streaming sites, so check it out. Trouble Is My Business, Tom Conkle, if you're interested. What did you think about this, Kurt? It was cool that you could watch it in both black and white and color. I watched it in black and white for the obvious reasons, but how did you feel about it? Was it similar? Was it different?
This film for me it's not the kind of film that I like. And I think I should just put that out there before I say anything about it. I think it's going to be great for the film noir fan or the crime movie fan who has seen, like, you've seen it all and you need something new and you want to watch this and you want to kind of analyze this film to see, like, oh yeah, I know where this came from and this came from, and he's referencing this here and that there. If that kind of thing is enjoyable to you, and I know a lot of people like that, then this would be a good film for you to watch. For me, that's not what I'm looking for in a film, so I didn't. But I do think that it's obviously that this is a work of a true fan, a true student of the film noir genre. It's just not the film for me, I guess.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, Conkle definitely knows what's come before, to put it simply.
Again, I think for the right viewer, and maybe coming at it with the right frame, the mindset of knowing what it is you're going to be watching before you sit down to watch it, I might not have had the right mindset. I was expecting something different, so that kind of threw it off for me.
Yeah, I was expecting the next LA Confidential, and again, my expectations were raised a little high. It's not that. It's not trying to be a neo noir. It's just trying to revisit old noir from a modern point of view, or at least with modern technology. So it was all right.
Subject Unknown.
Subject Unknown.
And welcome to Subject Unknown, where we pick a random topic and talk about it for a few minutes. And this time, this episode, we didn't have a real specific topic that either of us was super excited about talking about. And we thought it was time to sort of I guess, do a check-in with the show, talk to each other a little bit about where we're going with the show, give our listeners a little bit more of a long-term forecast than just, hey, these are the books we're looking at in the future. To go beyond what we are, a list of books that we're going to do. So what we wanted to accomplish here is to talk a little bit about our mindset of the books that we have past the ones we've mentioned already, and announce sort of a little trip we're going to take on Point Blank Podcast.
Woo.
And yeah, we're going to pack your bags and, well, not quite yet, but just it's time to get excited and maybe buy the guidebook to our future travels here.
We're going to Cleveland, goddammit. Oh, wait, no, that's not it.
It rocks, though.
Presumably. I've been there.
You know, what is our plan? We've already told you that we are going to do, our next episode is In a Lonely Place. Then we're going to be covering They Shoot Horses, Don't They? We've talked about those books already.
Yes.
Then we're going to get into some Ernest Hemingway, and we're going to get to something that's probably his closest book to a true crime novel, and that's To Have and to Have Not.
I'm super excited about this book. Since we started this podcast, I've had this book on my radar, and I'll admit, for episodes 18 through 20, we're definitely entering like dead white guy territory, and don't be surprised that we're definitely aware of that. But these are some classic touchstones that connect us to some of the early hard-boiled and noir tradition, and also pulls us out of the hard-boiled tradition, or at least crosses us over into more literary work with Ernest Hemingway and the author of episode 20. So in terms of To Have or Have Not, I've actually studied this in a graduate school class, and I've read it more than once, and it's one of Hemingway's least critically acclaimed books. So that's one reason it's particularly cool to read for this podcast, because not many people have read it. Even those who read Hemingway sometimes skip it. So I'm particularly enthused about spending time with this book, which chronicles crime in Key West and Cuba during the Great Depression. It deals with a lot of issues that have that appear repeatedly in this film: class and race, and to have or to have not. So.
Yeah, and I've read it already as well, and I enjoy it. And I do think I think it's important also for the show for us, even though Hemingway, is he a crime author? No, not really. But his writing style is so influential on so many of the authors that we talk about, that for analyzing the type of writing that both of us enjoy, I think having a little Hemingway into the conversation is pretty important. So,
oh, absolutely. If Dash Hammett is the godfather of hard-boiled crime fiction, then Hemingway is one of his biggest influences, and that's quote me on that.
Says Justin. So we're pretty excited about that one. And then following that, we're going to look at No Country for Old Men, which is going to get into that realm of Western noir, and that's by Cormac McCarthy. There's something interesting here that's important to this podcast, and that's Cormac and Justin, you may not know this, but we knew each other for years, and we had a lot of common interests and whatnot, but we didn't really talk about literature at the time.
No, we were too busy raising hell and getting into trouble.
That's right. And it's really Cormac McCarthy. You sent me Blood Meridian.
Oh, that's right.
And
I forgot.
Yeah, and this is actually a cool little story. I was working on a boat on the Great Lakes, and you sent me a book through the mail. The Great Lakes has the only floating zip code in the United States. And when you go through Detroit, you just address things to a ship, and the mail boat will come up alongside the ship and send up the mail. You sent me that book when I was on the boat, and I knew who Cormac McCarthy was, but I hadn't really read much of his stuff. And I read that, and I read The Road, and I read some other, and I'm like, man, I love this stuff. And that, I think, is the author that we sort of discovered that we enjoyed a lot of the same fiction.
That's really cool to hear. I mean, I know that, but after all the layers, I lost track. I'm glad. I think I was I must have been living in Flagstaff at the time when I sent that to you.
That
or
sounds
maybe,
right, yeah.
Tucson, somewhere in Arizona.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to talking about No Country for Old Men, and we can talk about Cormac McCarthy, and I think we'll have a lot of fun stuff to say about that author.
I definitely think so. He's one of my favorites, and No Country for Men is his most obvious nod to crime fiction and noir, because he's certainly in the Faulknerian literary camp for most of his work. But it's a good book. People say that the movie is better than the book. Well, the movie won an Oscar and is one of my top 5 films of all time, especially for crime films. So I would say the book is not that far behind, and I think it'll be a fun one to examine before we head overseas and begin our international literary road trip, Kurt.
That's right, listeners. You're going to have to pack your bags and come around the world with Justin and I, because we're gonna go around the world in 5 episodes. We're going to start in the Mediterranean. We're going to examine Total Chaos, which takes place in Marseille in France and is a key part of Mediterranean noir. We know that book for sure. I've already read it. I love it. It gives us a lot to talk about. Then we're going to head on to Africa, probably Nigeria. We haven't zeroed in on a book yet. Then we're off to Asia, possibly Bangkok. Then I know we're going to go to Brazil. We have a book picked out for that after Asia. Is that right, Justin?
Yeah, there's a Brazilian author we have in mind, and I think their name is Langston Gage. I could be wrong. There's a couple others too, but this one is a key crime novelist that we know very little about. And they passed away recently, so we thought about that. And then I think we were thinking about concluding in Mexico, because we still have yet to read a Mexican author for the podcast.
Yes. So we'll finish our tour in Mexico, and then we'll sneak across the border after that and come on home.
Yes. So I hope you are looking forward to this as much as we are. It's going to be probably half the year where we take this detour, and we're going to use each of these international episodes, these regional episodes, as a jump-off point to explore through our subject unknown and through our 5-round burst some of the other authors and novels from the area that really stand out and impress us. So it's going to be a learning experience for us, and I presume it will be for you as well, at least in some of the cases. So hang tight, and if you do have recommendations for us, we'd love to hear them, because this is going to be all of 2019 essentially. Shoot them out to us via our Facebook or our Goodreads sites, or shoot us a comment via Twitter. We'd love any recs that you have as we build our list.
Yeah, and this is something I'm super excited about. I think when we set out to do the podcast, we wanted to cover some classics here early on, and but these more thematic episodes is what the vision was. So I'm excited to get into those elements and really discuss these regions, and really find some authors that both we as hosts of the show and you as listeners have not heard about before. So we're excited for that trip.
And the other aspect of this subject unknown is that, doing a podcast, you never know how long it's going to last, and you never know to what extent it's going to hold your interest. And, Kurt and I have talked about what we're doing and what we like and where we want to go. But there have been some milestones. We've hit our episode 10. We've hit episode 15. With Cormac McCarthy's No Country, we're going to be at episode 20, and by the end of International Literary Road Trip, we will be at episode 25. So we're at the point where, when we think about this podcast, we're thinking not only of where we're going, but also where we've been and what we've liked and what we haven't liked. And it's fun to sort of wax philosophical on that. We've made some adjustments over the course of the series. We started with single, very long episodes, and now we've sort of broken them into 2 for the sake of the listener and for our own headspace. And we would love to hear any recommendations our listeners have about what we might look like in the future. We're constantly keeping abreast of what we're doing and considering how we might shape or adjust the contours of the podcast in the future for the sake of you listeners, but also for ourselves. So anything you have to offer, please let us know. How do you feel about where we've been, Kurt, through 15 episodes? Are you happy?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy. I mean, and the other thing too is the way we number our episodes is a little bit weird. So, even though this is episode 16, we've really released more than 20 episodes, and
that's true.
Yeah, and we've been pretty consistent for a show that is, really we're just a couple of amateurs at this. We have weird schedules that don't really allow for the type of releases you see from some, more some podcasts that release every other week or every week on Monday or whatever it is. That's just not what we can do based on the rest of our lives. But I think considering what else we've got going on, we've been pretty consistent, and I've been happy with that. I've been happy to see that we've got quite a number of listeners who are actively engaged with the material. Our Goodreads group.
Yes, it makes so much of a difference. I didn't think it would at first because so much of this is just our own intellectual headspace. But when I get a good response or a helpful hand or high five from a listener or somebody who cares about what we're doing, it really feeds us. It makes us, it's a motivational, definitely a motivational tool for sure.
Yeah. And, this Goodreads group that has been starting it up is really great. I really encourage the listeners to join that. Even if you don't, even if you don't comment all that much, it is a good space to be. And it is good to see what other people in the group are reading and thinking about. One thing that we don't do really is we don't promote the show like a lot of podcasts do. We don't do bumpers with other shows. We don't pay for promos on Facebook. This has all been growing through word of mouth, really, and that's great to see. I mean, we knew that this was going to be a niche podcast from the get-go, and our growth has been great. Every time we release an episode, we're seeing more numbers, and that's exciting. And we're really thankful to all of you listeners for downloading and giving us a listen. So thank you very much.
Definitely. We're like the Fugazi of podcasts. We're all about DIY. We build it from scratch, and we pay our way and pay our dues, and we're not looking to make it big with by selling ourselves out to some kind of mainstream overlords. That being said, if anybody wants to give us money or help work out some arrangement for advertising or promotion, please get in touch with us and we'll talk. We're not opposed, but we're just not actively pursuing or have some kind of dollar signs in our eyes. We're not making any money off of this. We're just looking to maybe someday break even.
Yeah, and that being said, we have recently started a Patreon page. And I'm going to guess if you're a regular podcast listener, you're familiar with that. And basically what it is a web page that you can give us a monthly or per episode donation of $1 or $3 or whatever it is. And, would we love to have your assistance? Yes, we would. But is this podcast going to stop if we don't get any donations? No, it's not. But there are, like Justin said, there are costs associated with this. We pay for web hosting. We pay for the website. Of course, we buy the books. We'd be probably doing that anyway. But there are quite a number of books that we buy that I wouldn't get because unless we were doing the podcast. So if this is worth $1 an episode or $2 or $3 or whatever an episode, you can find that Patreon page. We'll put a link in the show notes, and you can feel free to make a little donation.
Definitely.
But one thing we're not going to do on this show ever is we're not going to have ads where we try to sell you mattresses or meal gift boxes or any of that kind of crap, because that isn't who we are. If we're going to do ads on this show, it's going to be for things that you might actually want. If you're listening to a noir fiction podcast, like books or bookstores or maybe a movie, but anything like that, maybe, but we're not going to just hawk wares to you just because you're actively listening to the show.
Oh, we're all about hawking cultural and ideological enrichment, whatever that might mean.
Yes, enrichment for sale here.
We want to fortify your weekly diet.
Well, speaking of enrichment, I guess we should get back to actually enriching our listeners' lives by possibly talking about a little bit about Walter Mosley himself and his biography.
Who is this gentleman? And I actually looked for a biography of his and didn't find one in of these official biographies that we found for many of our other authors. He is alive, that's part of it. But I'll be curious when you give us the scoop on Mosley, what you came across in your research.
Well, it's tricky because here we go again with an author who's still alive. So you're right. There isn't really, there's some reader's guides to him and whatnot, but there isn't a biography of him because he's still, not only is he still alive, but he's still writing, he's still doing stuff. And in place of reading a book, I watched, about 6 hours of YouTube interviews with him over the last couple of days. And wow. Yeah. And first of all, I have to say that he is an interesting person to listen to be interviewed. He's obviously a very deep thinker about the things he believes. And if anything that you hear in either the discussion of the book or the discussion of Mosley as an individual is compelling to you, I would encourage you to listen to some of his interviews, because he is a very deep thinker. So let's start a little bit about his bio. He was born in 1952 in LA, so he knows Los Angeles intimately. He grew up there. His mother was, her name was Ella, maiden name Slatkin, and she was a Jewish woman from ancestors are from Russia. She was also a socialist, and his father was named Leroy. He was an African American from Louisiana who moved to LA. He was a custodian and working at the public schools, and that is where the two of them met. The story of their marriage is actually quite interesting, and I think you can see the elements of what happens in this very first E.Z. Rawlins book coming very strongly for Mosley's family background here. His mother was originally married to one of the richest men in L.A. At the time, but because of her socialist politics, she said, well, I need to get a job. So she gets a job with the public schools, and that's where she meets Leroy. And she realizes that, this guy I've been married to for a number of years, I'm not really in love with him. I'm in love with with Leroy. So she leaves her rich husband to marry, or try to marry, this African-American custodian at the public school.
Interesting.
Now, yeah, and there's a story that they tried to get married and they weren't issued a marriage certificate, even though their marriage would have been legal in California. I saw that in multiple places on the internet. That's actually wrong. Mosley says that the reason they couldn't get a marriage certificate is that his father had an estranged marriage back in Louisiana or something, that hadn't been officially divorced or whatnot. So they end up getting married when Walter's about 8 years old. He attends Victory Baptist School, which was an all African-American elementary school in LA. And this school is particularly notable because it's one of the only schools, or one of the first schools in America, that was actively teaching Black history to its students at that level. He credits his parents, both his mother, for encouraging his reading. She was, and a lot of his politics, I imagine, even though he doesn't explicitly say that. But she encouraged him to read widely. His father, he describes as a very deep thinker. He calls him a Black Socrates, and a very good storyteller. The kind of person who at a party, when he started to tell a story, everybody would sort of stop and listen. And, both of his parents sound like very interesting, powerful people. And I would have enjoyed learning. I would love to read the biography just to learn a little bit more about his parents, to be honest with you. After he graduates from high school, he goes to Goddard College, and he drops out of there. He goes to Johnson State College and gets a degree in poli-sci, and he abandons his doctorate in political science to become a computer programmer. And ultimately, that computer programming would lead him to work at Mobil Oil in New York. And
interesting.
Yeah, and this I think is interesting because we'll find out that he's also a science fiction writer, like I mentioned. But this early, he was in the early days of computer programming, really. That dealing with technology is something that does come up in his fiction. It's obvious that maybe computer programming wasn't as compelling to him as he might have liked, because that's when he starts writing. And he starts writing through both his own interests, but he also takes a writing course at City College in Harlem. He starts writing at 34, and now he has written almost 60 books across genres of mystery, science fiction, erotica. He's written plays for the stage. He's also written nonfiction. There's 14 E.Z. Rawlins books, as I mentioned earlier. And awards, his list of awards is quite enormous, but most notable, I would say, is, he won an O. Henry Award. He's a 3-time winner of the NAACP Image Award. He even won a Grammy for writing album notes.
That's a thing?
That's
writing the liner notes to an album can yield you a Grammy.
Apparently so. In the realm of writing, it can't be that hard, right?
Yeah, wow, impressive.
And then most notably, for the sake of this podcast, he is the 2016 winner of the Grand Master Award from the Mystery Writers of America.
It's impressive. That's quite the list. Limited frame of time, he's achieved an incredible amount.
Yeah, and a lot of people, when I was reading the interviews with, or listening to the interviews with him, they ask him about that. I mean, it is a huge amount, a huge volume of material. And, he credits this basically to the fact that, he started writing, I believe, when he was 34, but since he was 38, he writes 2 to 3 hours every day. Except if he's like super sick or has an early flight, he's writing 2 to 3 hours. That's really what he credits to his writing success, is just doing it every day, and then reflecting. It's obvious in his interviews that he's a very deeply self-reflective individual. He thinks a lot.
Sure.
And as most writers, I think, probably are. But that's what he credits his success to, is writing every day, thinking about it, doing other things, and just being engaged.
I've actually just been going through some of my files and realizing how many pieces, academic pieces, I have on Walter Mosley that I forgot entirely, because I found them probably last year when I was planning ahead for this episode, just by going to the academic search engine at the university and pulling stuff in. And there's a lot of real good, thoughtful academic writing on his work and his contributions, and how they speak to Chester Himes and early African American writers in the genre, and also how they speak to other aspects of human life on Earth. But I'm excited about reading some of these and copy and pasting them to our show notes, which we've been negligent to put up on a regular basis on our website, because we are just really busy and we're shitty about the website, and we're going to change that soon, we hope. But I will, when we get them all organized and ready, I will share with you all these really cool articles, including a great review or interview on the art of fiction in the Paris Review. I'm not sure if you saw that one or not, Kurt, but
no.
But I'm going to put that up there.
No,
it refers to the grammar notes, and it refers to his programming history with mobile oil and all that. So
it is interesting, because this isn't a modern author in the information age, so we have a ton of online material for him, unlike some of our other authors. But it is very clear that he not only does he have a lot to say in his fiction, but he is a very interesting interview. So there's a lot of material about him out there, and a lot of people are curious about what he has to say. He has a lot of excellent commentary on race in America, the economic system, the system of power, and politics in America. So it's no surprise to me that there's a lot of academic writing out there. He's been a longtime screenwriting teacher, I should say, at Sundance. He's been doing that for like 20 years or something like that.
Cool.
Along with that, a lot of his material has been made into films. The Devil in a Blue Dress, like we're talking about today, it was made into a film in 1995 with Denzel Washington. I didn't watch that because... Did you watch that, Justin?
No, I did not.
Yeah, I didn't do it because I felt like when I've done that in the past, watched the film, it sort of clouds my vision of the book. So I'll probably take a look.
Agreed.
I'll take a look at it after the episode, because I'm curious. It's supposed to be a pretty good movie. But he's been doing some screenwriting on some shows.
I have a question about the videos you found of his. Are those just YouTube videos?
Yes. Yeah. I found a number of YouTube videos with him, and then there's it's like a 3-hour interview with him on C-SPAN 2's Book Talk, which he has a lot of good things to say. I don't know where they found, or I guess this person is a regular interviewer on C-SPAN, but it was like the most boring interviewer I think I've ever seen.
Jeez.
Yeah, thankfully Mosley saves the day. One of the interesting things about him is, he comes from this background of having an African-American father and a Jewish mother. And I don't even know why this is a debate, why he can't be both, but there's some debate out there about whether or not he's a Jewish author or not. And he kind of chuckles about it when he gets asked about it, but it's like, well, his mother's Jewish. So yeah, I mean, he's both. Why can't he be both?
Yeah. How do we define Jewishness? Any of these types of questions run into sort of mind-boggling thought projects.
It's a weird controversy, because I think the problem is that Mosley himself is not very religious. And so if he embraced his Jewish religion, then they'd be like, oh yes, he's a Jewish author. But because he's not exactly an atheist, but he, let's call him an atheist just for make it easier. Then he's like, well, he's not really Jewish, and he's not really writing about Jewish characters. Well, his mother, he's from a Jewish background. So how can he not be both Jewish and African American? I don't know why that's a big controversy, but that's what gets people online excited, I guess.
We're a binary society. We're breaking free from it slowly but surely, but so much is foolish and dangerous, and that's really what it comes down to. I'm thinking in terms of pluralism.
And an interesting transition into one of the major themes of The Devil in a Blue Dress, which we're going to talk about in part 2 of this episode.
Yes, coming soon to a theater near you. Well, I'll say this to wrap up the bio stuff. Mosley seems like an interesting dude. I'm excited about reading more of his work. But before I do that, of course, we need to move on to our second episode, part 2 of this episode, or whatever we call this, episode 15, or our feature on Mosley. So let's wrap up now, and we'll catch you folks 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks after this comes out for the second half, where we delve into the nitty-gritty of what makes Devil in a Blue Dress a satisfying book and where we think it has room for improvement.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Until then, see you later, folks.
Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.